welcome to another episode of the Tell Not Show. As always, we're your hosts. We have the fabulous Kirsha Fox, author of Son of Deception and The White Leaf Child. She's a homeschooling mom of four, avid reader, and gamer.
And my co-host is Julia J.K. Allen, editor, author, and author coach. She's a fantasy and horror author who loves to sprinkle magic on everything. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, and we're very excited to welcome our guest tonight. Go ahead and tell us all about him.
Yes, Stephen Schneider has a wolf, so of course he writes middle grade fantasy. He enjoys inspiring kids to write their own stories. So we're so happy to have him.
Yes. Welcome.
Welcome. Evening.
Yay. So tell us a little bit about your author journey. What got you started with writing, and what has it looked like for you?
Wow, that's a lot, actually. I'll try and do the condensed version. So clear back in 2012, I was a Girl Scout leader for my daughter's troop. And I noticed all the girls were reading, which was great, but they were reading books that had male protagonists. And I thought, we need more books with girl protagonists in there. So I thought maybe I'll do that sometime. And that's as far as it went until 2015, when a couple things happened that kind of spurred me into saying, oh, the universe is talking to me and telling me you really should write. So I started writing the following year. And of course, like a lot of authors, I spent the year, wrote my first book, which was going to be the great American novel, change the world. Everybody's going to love it. Mm-hmm. And I sent it to my editor, and she came back with so much read. I pulled out like literally 35,000 out of 70,000 words. Since then, I've been improving, trying to write a lot and involve a few other aspects of storytelling besides just writing my books. So that's the nutshell version of the journey.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I love that it was kind of inspired by seeing all these young girls, but like wanting to give them protagonists that they could relate to a little bit more. That's like such a great story, because I feel like, we all have characters that we fall in love with when it comes to reading, and that like really like gives us a lot to go on in life too.
Right. Yeah. And now luckily, here we are, 12 years later, there's actually quite a few good books with female protagonists and strong female leads. And, all those girls are now in their 20s. So they're older than that. But, I think if back then, if they would have had those books, they would have been reading them. But, they were tough girls. We did February winter cabin camping in Ohio. Yeah. We did tracking in the snow. They built a dollhouse and we donated it to a community center. So it was a pretty good group of girls. I wasn't too worried about them getting out into the world.
No, that's amazing. Because I love to write young adult myself, so a little bit older than middle grade. But I really love it because, like, I feel like, those good role models are so important. And like there were some different books that were like really popular when I was like younger. And I just hated like the role, like they weren't good role models to me because it was just like, oh, my boyfriend left, so I'm just going to lay in bed for 3 months. And I was like, no, we don't lie in bed for 3 months. We don't tell girls to do that when their like boyfriend goes somewhere else. Like, they get on with their life and they do things. And, so I really love to write young adults as well, just because I'm like, I want to give like badass characters to people to inspire them, right?
And I've been trying to mix up the characters. Unfortunately, it's just kind of natural because of what I read and who I am to just write a boy, and if it's not an orc or a goblin or something, it ends up. I had to talk to my cover artist to change some of the characters. I'm like, you know what? I think this character would actually be better this way, but now we got to change it all. It's so hard, especially for someone like me. I don't want to write everything is just all white guys or white kids. I want to get some variety, but I don't want people saying, well, you're not black, how do you know? Or you're not Chinese, or you're not Native American, how do you know? So it gets very, very difficult. And luckily I've got some great author friends from around the world of all different ethnicities and cultures and countries that I can say, hey, can you read this? Did I screw things up, or is this okay?
Right. And I think most people appreciate diverse characters, and they understand that, like, as long as you're not trying to write a story about what racism is like most people don't have an issue with it. I think there's some people that are trying to tell stories that are like they're just not experienced
Right.
in those issues, but like we all love diverse characters and stuff like that. So I think it's like laudable that you have
Yeah,
different characters that you're
I'm
writing.
just finishing the second book of my series, and
Yeah.
the third book. There's a very strong female archer in there. She's an elf, and she's Gobi Green. So I
Yeah.
can write a green character really easily.
Right.
Mhm.
That does make it a little easier. So tell us a little bit about the genres you do write and why you chose them.
I write what's easy for me. I was trying when I first started to write adult thriller, because that's what people read, and those that sell well, and let me write that. And I was working with a couple authors, they were mentoring me, and we kept trying to, this doesn't feel right, doesn't sound right. And the one said, why don't you just write middle grade? You talk about kids all the time. You talk about you have toy collections, you have comic books, you communicate with kids. You're kind of a kid. Why don't you just write that? And it clicked so well. It was like, why was I fighting this? And it's like, no question. I can write middle grade a lot easier. I fit in with it a lot easier. And fantasy is my thing. And I can't write good modern, kids in school and stuff like that, but I can write fantasy. That's what I'm good at. So, that's what I do. And I've got another series that's slightly alternate universe British history, but with some steampunk elements, and it's a spy thing. Think of like 1930s mafia spy type thing. And I got another series, and the one I'm most excited about, it is actually kind of set in today's world, but it's a group of kids that are like cryptid hunters. They hunt Bigfoot, and they hunt for Loch Ness and witches and all sorts of things, and they all have their own little talents. That's the one I'm most excited about that I'm getting started on. There's just not enough time and too many stories.
Right. No, I love that. And I think that there is something to be said for like writing what we're passionate about naturally, right? Because like, we can always try and write to market or try and write what's trending.
Right.
But like when you're passionate about something, it's a lot easier. I feel like it just comes out more naturally.
I sure hope so, because I've grown in love with the characters I've been writing. Started off just being a short story. We have here I live by Kent State, and they have a Wizarding World festival every year. And I wanted to set up an author table, but I didn't have anything out. So I'm like, okay, I'll write a short story with this wizard and magic. And I'm like, great, that's a great short story, but it needs this. And now suddenly it's a book, and then suddenly it's 4 books. And now I've got a couple more plans. So, it turned into a short throwaway story that I was just going to use into a full series of books that I love the characters now.
Oh, that's awesome, though. That's a great experience for sure. When stories grow, like sometimes it can be sometimes it can be a pain when they grow, but a lot of times we love it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, wait a second, that's not what I planned for you. Why are you doing that? Well, I guess I better write it down.
Right.
I went through something similar when my fantasy standalone became a trilogy.
Yeah.
It's funny how that happens. These characters become living. And I always tell kids, like when I do an author visit and talk to kids, I'm like, I don't try and plan out a story. I don't write a story. What I do is I kind of peel open this dimension rift between my world and the other world, and I watch them to see what they're doing, and then I just write it down. And I think kids laugh a little bit about that, but that's kind of how it feels. I mean, there's so many times I'm just going along, the story just keeps coming, and I'm like, where's this coming from? Because it's really good, and I didn't plan it, So the kids click with that, I think.
Yeah, no, what a fun way of describing it too. I know a lot of authors that talk about like, I just write down what happens and just follow them around and write it down, like just recording what's going on with the characters. Yeah, because they feel like they kind of like the characters do their own things. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Did you come up with any short stories to go along with that? Because it's like, you know what? I wonder what that character was doing. Well, here, let me get a short story to go with it.
Right. Yeah. No.
Guilty, right? I should be writing my next series, but now I'm going to write the short story instead because I got to tell the story.
Right. That's one of my tricks for writer's block.
Yes. So is that how your writing process is then? You just sit down and, turn on that fantasy and you just type it out, or do you plot points ahead of time at all?
Yes, to both, and kind of. So when I started out, I had no idea how to even think of a story. I just knew all the stories I'd read, so I just started writing, which is why the first book, half of it got thrown away. um, but I also am a database computer programmer, so I'm very analytical, very technical. And as I learn to write more, and as I learn story and form, and where the arcs are in the first act, second act, third act, and climax, and getting all that. Once I learned all of that, I could see a whole story better and easier. And I don't sit down and plot it out like as detailed as I hear Patterson does, where it's like literally little movements and stuff all planned out. I get the major points and the things I try to get across, so I get my story arc. And then I'll start writing. And a lot of times I end up adjusting the outline or adding things in and moving things around. But I need to get the basic story down, or my mind will just be jumping all the time. If I know I've got the basic story, I can be more creative in the details and the chapters and the scenes, which I've also noticed come easier and have grown. I used to struggle. It's like, well, I got the whole story. It's 7,000 words. Now it's like, well, I spent a weekend and I've got 10,000 words down, and it's like, the first couple scenes. And I think the scenes are better. So that's what I tell the kids. That's what I tell other authors if I talk to them. It's like, if you're just starting out, everybody wants that first one to be so good and perfect, but you're so much better off writing, putting it away, writing something else, putting it away, writing something else. Because by the time you get to that third or fourth book, you've learned so much just by writing that now if you go back and look at it and you go do the training and you go to classes, now it makes a lot more sense because you have referenced something that you wrote. When you're trying to do it kind of in a vacuum without any writing experience, a lot of what you're trying to learn just stresses you out and you don't learn as much of it. My opinion, what I've seen, that's what I advise.
No, that's good advice. I like that advice of just kind of like getting the practice. I always tell people practice finishing things, right? You learn so much just from finishing stories, whether that's short or long stories, but there's something to be learned just by the finishing of it too, which because that's something that I struggled with early on as a writer, was that I would have great starts to stuff but never finished, and so I had to really look into my writing process and figure that out.
and it's amazing after you've written some things and you go pick up that book that you were trying to understand and grasp everything, and you read it and you're like, oh, I get it now, it clicks. You read through it and you're like, okay, I didn't learn as much as I thought because I learned it all just from writing. That seems to be the biggest thing that this cracks me up. And I'm saying this as I've been writing for a while. I can't say I've published a lot. I'm not best-selling USA Today. So, this is the thing. But I go to several groups and I listen to get people in there. It's like, well, I just started writing. Well, how do we publish? How do we set up an account for Kobo? How do we do this? Like, you got one chapter done. Get some more writing. Forget the publishing. That comes later. That's so much easier than the writing. But everybody gets so worried about publishing. It's like, you're like a year or two away from worrying about that. Get the writing done. And then they do the opposite. They figure out all the publishing stuff, and then they write and they spend 4 years tweaking every little word and everything. It's like, stop, just get done, move on, because you'll learn even more writing the next one. It's so weird. And I can't say I've always taken my own advice, but that's what I would recommend.
That is good advice, though, because writing the second book was so challenging for me, and I think part of it is because our tastes evolve and we get better tastes, but then trying to match that is harder, right? So writing the second book is definitely a challenge, and there's something to be learned from each book that we write that we can kind of incorporate into our overall style.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's great advice of just get the writing down and then put it away for a little bit. A lot of times our first novels we should be so proud of because we wrote a novel, but they should sit for a little, a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm pulling that one back out. It was a great idea, and I still
Yeah.
kind of love the story and the world, but I just don't know if I have enough in me to go and redo all of it so much.
Right.
You know,
right.
it was just
yeah.
it was a big mishmash. Maybe someday the idea I need to break it down to the basic idea again and rebuild it.
Right.
Now that I've got
right.
more experience under my belt.
Well, the nice thing is, so I always advise people, sometimes when we're struggling, it's because we're trying to be precious with our words. And sometimes starting a story that we've like started a draft for, but just blank page and start over, that can be really freeing, and that can really like be a creative endeavor that like is worth doing sometimes. Because I know people will get like, so many chapters in and then kind of get stuck, but it's like because they're trying to force it, right? They're trying to force it a direction. It shouldn't be going. So sometimes a blank start or blank page, fresh start is like the perfect way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've realized that any chapter that I'm stuck on and I just try and plow through it and I force it, that's always the worst chapter, always the first one to go, always the one that I think I'm taking a shower, I'm taking a drive, walking the dog. I'm like, oh, here's what I should have done. Let me get rid of all that because it sucks. And here's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And I've read, and this was a revelation for me too. So I've read Stephen King and Kuntz, two of my favorites. I've read ton, everybody out there. But there was one book, I think Talisman, I was reading more recently with King, and I read a part, and I'm like, wow, that sentence really sucked, and it was difficult to understand, and it was pretty bad, and I'm like, wow, even the greats will screw up and have a bad sentence, or somebody was afraid to tell Stephen King, hey, change this. He didn't catch it. But my point was that, so what, he messed up a sentence. So what, there was some wording that was a little garbled, maybe not what I would have done. I don't even remember that. A year later, I remember the basic story, and was freeing for me because I didn't get so uptight as, okay, do I need to edit it one more time? Do I need to change this sentence one more time? Should I spend the next 3 hours modifying this one paragraph to make it perfect? No, the story is what people remember. And if you have the story that flows and is good, all the other stuff is much more forgivable and they forget. They'd much rather have a good story. But if your story sucks, everyone will tell you about every comma and apostrophe and bad word and everything. So.
Yes. We don't need to be perfect. That's for sure.
Which is good.
Right. It is very, very nice. It's very relieving. I do like that. I always tell people, if you get a bad review, you're in great company, because you can look up your favorite author, like you think they're the best writer in the world, and they have 1-star reviews. They have a lot of 1-star reviews, I bet.
And some are really ridiculous. So I know this author. He's a actually famous, known sci-fi author. He's one of the reasons I started writing. I met him, didn't know he was an author, and he was super nice. And then when I found out how many books he'd written, I was like, oh, so it was one of the things that kickstarted me. But he laughs all the time because he writes hard sci-fi military. Like he will explain how the hyperdrive works in this world and all that. And it's military. There's battles and shit. The front cover has a ship blowing up, floating over a planet. That's what he got. A 1-star review said, there's not enough romance in this. Where the heck did you think there's going to be romance in this book? He laughs about it. So
starship in space.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Some people just picked up the wrong book and it wasn't their cup of tea, and for some reason they decided to ding the author on it.
Right.
If I realized, I wanted romance, I was reading sci-fi military, maybe I'd like stop and go find something else.
Right. Maybe. But, we can't, it takes all kinds to make the world go round.
Exactly. But he's made a career and he's had 1-star reviews, so anybody could do it. Don't freak out.
Right. No, for sure. What do you think is the most important part of writing? This can be the writing process or anything. Yeah.
Actually writing?
Yes.
That sounds weird. But like I said, I've known too many authors that, like one of the author groups I go to, we rotate around and you can read a chapter and get reviewed. Like one author came for a year almost reading the same chapter, trying to get it good. And I'm like, well, how much more have you written? Well, not until I get this one done. You've got a 30 chapter book. You've taken a year to do one chapter. You're not going to live that long. You really need to
Right,
speed up the
right.
process here. So yeah, just the writing. And you know, I have had the question asked, well, where do you get your ideas? Where don't I? It's like every day. It's sometimes picking which idea I want to work on and staying with it to
Yeah.
get the whole story down.
Right.
And then having other people actually read it. You got to get over that fear of having other people read your stuff and
my
get the
goodness.
feedback, good feedback. Family members, oh yeah, that was good. That is so not helpful. It's not going to
Right.
improve your writing. Find somebody who is not your best friend or family that maybe not even likes your writing. That then they'll tell you
Right.
this is what wasn't really great, and that's what you need to get better. And don't be afraid of that. See, if you're afraid of
Yeah.
that, the minute you publish and you have people telling you how bad everything is, you're going to feel way worse. So let people
Right.
tell you before you publish it.
No, that is very valuable advice. I think so I studied creative writing at school, and the most valuable part is the feedback that you do workshop with everyone in the class, because it's just like some people, maybe they don't get the story and their feedback's not great, but you do get really valuable feedback. And I always see people say like, oh, you got to put your 10,000 hours in of writing. But if you're not getting any feedback, you could be getting 10,000 hours of practice of bad writing, right? Because you're not getting that course correction, right? So
That's
part of
true
the
too.
10,000 hours is having the right mentors, having the right teachers, having the right, feedback.
And it's
Getting.
weird. I've seen again King and some of the others. People say, this certain book in this certain chapter, and the character did this and blah blah blah, and almost to a T, the author's like, yeah, I wrote that like 20 years ago. I have no idea. I haven't read it. I don't remember it. The fans always remember more. And it's true. I got done with my first book, worked on my second, went back to the first, and I'm like, wait a minute, who put this in here? When did that happen?
Right.
Totally had forgotten pieces of it. And it's like I spent a long time on that book.
Yeah.
So if you do put stuff aside, going back to your old stuff, you see it in a whole different light. And with the improvements you've made to your writing. So you can kind of judge and edit your own stuff in that way, but you got to put that time in between.
Yes, no, when I always recommend like take at least 2 weeks off between edits and everything that you're doing, like write the draft, put it away, let yourself forget it a little bit before you
it
like
becomes fresh.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great advice. Are you a character or a plot guy?
Ooh, I'm not really 100% sure. I'm working on improving my characterization. I still have the problem sometimes of what I have in my head doesn't always make it onto the paper because I feel it. Well, that seems obvious. It's not. So I'm still working on that. I think I've gotten a few good plot ideas and a few not so good plot ideas, but those were short stories, and I think that it helped build the character. I'd like to say I'm more character, but I really don't know.
Yeah. I think for me, ideal world both, right? We don't want to have like just character or just plot. But yes, characters are what I fall in love with for sure. So I do lean a little bit more on the character side of things.
Yeah.
But one great thing is if you figure out your character's motivation, you can figure out a lot of your plot that way too, because you know why they're doing things and you know what decisions they'll make when faced with different circumstances, and then that's really helpful.
100%. And that's another area that if you're trying to do it with the first book you're writing and well, I need to improve this. And again, you're overwhelming yourself and it becomes much harder to write that book. It has become easier to do that as I've written more. And I actually just sent something in last fall to the Writer's Digest competition, which I did not anticipate winning, which I did not. And the feedback I got, I was a little disappointed in, but it helped me say, okay, here's the areas that I'm weak in, the areas I need to focus on more, which I feel I can do now better because again, I don't have to think about writing so much. The writing comes. Now I can focus on here. They said this was weak with character. I can see that here. Now I know what to put in. Again, it kind of builds over time.
Absolutely.
No, that's great. Like I always say, like it's a strength to know what our weaknesses are, because then we can like find ways to work towards fixing that, right? Like if you're
Right.
completely unaware of what your foibles or flaws may be, then they're just going to be glaringly obvious to the reader in the book. But if you're like, oh, like for me, I write walls of dialogue, and so I know when I'm editing, like, okay, let's put in what the characters are doing because they're not just talking in a void, or you know, things like that. You can really work towards strengthening any kind of weaknesses that you have.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's why I love working with the younger kids, like 3rd to 5th grade,
Yeah.
because they're not afraid. They'll just, they don't know that they should be nervous about writing. They don't know that writing's hard. They just know they have a great story. They want to write it down. They're excited. And if they do, and I've said this to parents, and a lot of times I'm not understood, but if these kids at that age start writing stories without the judgment, without telling them, oh, you should improve this. Okay. I've talked to a couple teachers about this. We should not be teaching grammar and spelling until later. We should teach them just writing and storytelling and worry about the grammar and spelling later, because they get so uptight and worked up about memorizing words and grammar and all that. And then the story gets overlooked and they don't learn how to write. And it just becomes a pain their whole life. But if they've written several things for a couple years in school, I absolutely guarantee spelling and grammar will be so much easier for them to pick up later. And they won't have to spend 12 years on it as they understand what it's for. We do it in a vacuum now, and it doesn't make sense to me, because those younger kids, man, they tell you the story. You know, with that translation software, have them speak into a microphone and tell stories, man. These kids will go all day long, and they're not afraid. They don't have the same hang-ups we have.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you on so many points. I myself didn't really discover a love of reading until like I was in 5th grade or so. And before that, I was one of the worst spellers in the class. I struggled to put together words and sentences. I thought I was really dumb. And I just started reading, and I did nothing but read for like 3 years. And after that, I just knew how to spell words. I just knew how a sentence was supposed to be structured. I knew the vocabulary. I knew what things meant without ever having to study it. You learn through absorbing it, through repetition, through studying the greats just by absorbing.
Yeah.
So now I'm a homeschooling mom, and I'm just like, here you go, kiddo. Here's a stack of books. Have fun. You will pick it up as you go.
Kirsha, I'd love to send you some things, because all of my stories, all my books, short stories, everything in the back, I always put discussion questions and words to know, and write your own story ideas based on this story. I'd love to send this over to you, get any feedback, on how well that is, or if you use it at all and your kids like it. I would absolutely love that. So I'll shoot some stuff to you after this, and that'd be great.
How very kind of you. Yeah, no, that sounds fabulous. I love that you have discussion questions and ways to make it into a lesson plan for people. That's amazing.
That's been my kind of goal right from the beginning, is I started doing this and publishing right before COVID, and then COVID is like, well, now's when everybody needs this stuff. And I know teachers struggle. I've worked with several teachers, and everybody expects so much out of them, and it's like they don't have the time. They need lesson plans. They need this. So are my books necessarily the most perfect? No. Are they the best books the kids will ever read? Arguable. I'm not going to say they suck or anything. But if they enjoy the book, and I've had several kids who like, when's your second book coming out? Where is it? I want it. And it includes discussion questions. That can make the story so much better just by discussing it with them, and parents talking with them. And if it helps teachers be able to go home an hour earlier because they don't have to worry about that, great. We all win,
Yeah, no, that's huge. That's amazing. And it's a great selling point for your books too, of like, hey, built-in lessons.
Yeah. I'm going to put all the discussion questions and words to know on my website. I'm working on that. To show parents and teachers this is what is included. It's just part of it. Not full lesson plans or anything. I'm not really qualified for that. But I think I can come up with good questions.
Yes. Do you have a favorite author, and what do you think they do well?
Okay. Wow. So I've mentioned him a couple times already, but Stephen King has been my
I was wondering.
go-to for most of my life. But There's many others. I've read so much and read so many things now. I mean, I just got done reading my first Louis L'Amour book, and I don't really care for Westerns a lot, but I'd never read them. I read Agatha Christie. I didn't really care for her a lot. I tried 3 times, and I'm like, nope, just don't care for her writing. A newer author I've run into, Jeff Strand. He's become one of my favorites, and I actually have met the man and talked to him. He's been on my podcast for the horror, and I'm going to see him in a couple months. You know, he writes easy way to describe it is most of his books are adult goosebumps. So it's very fun.
My alley. Yes, I'll have to check him out. Yes,
Jeff Strand. Yeah, and what made me jump to him was I found out that he was born 2 days before me, and he lived about 8 miles from me for most of high school life.
Wow!
So it was like, okay, here's the universe talking to me again. You know?
Yes. Small world. I love when that happens.
Mhm.
I am a huge horror junkie on the side, and I do dabble in writing horror as well. But I discovered Stephen King in like middle grade or middle school, and I just like went off on the deep end a little bit. I feel like most people who get into horror like get into it too young, but like, when there's books like Goosebumps out, like it kind of encourages you to explore a little. And so I really love horror.
Yeah, I didn't have Goosebumps. That came out way after me. But R.L. Stein's from Cleveland, so there's another Ohio for me. But my mother always encouraged reading, and when I was 8 for Christmas, she got me the Black Beauty box set. And then when I was 9, she got me the Stephen King box set. And then when I was 10, it was Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. So that was 3 years in a row with some amazing books.
And also very different too. I love that, like that variety that you got.
Yeah.
Eclectic
my son took my Lord of the Rings books. I think they still have the slipcase.
Right. Good luck getting those back, right?
That's not happening.
Good problem to have is that the books got passed along.
Luckily, though, they're plentiful enough. I can just go to the used bookstore and grab them all.
Right. Yes.
So I loved your advice to new authors about finding people to review your work and give like feedback, like honest feedback, instead of just, oh, this is the best thing I've ever read, because that isn't helpful at all.
Right.
I discovered that was very true for myself. And then also I've noticed a trend, without naming any specific authors, but there is a thing when certain authors get so successful that they can't be told what to do anymore. They push it through. They say, no, I'm going to keep this, or I'm not going to change it because I'm a bigger name now. And if I can just leave and go to a different publisher if I want to, right? And at that point, their work starts to go down a little bit in quality because they are not taking the advice of others.
Right.
So anyway, leading into that is my next question. If you could tell a new author one thing, what would you tell them?
Write more. Just write something else. Write another thing. Keep writing more. If you get ideas, because who doesn't get ideas twice a day before coffee? My Scrivener folder has so many idea stories ready to go. But just stick to something and write it and get it done. If you really got to do something else, make sure that first thing is where your focus is at. So if you've jumped off of it to a second thing, and you haven't gone back to that first thing for a while, you really need to, because like you guys said at the beginning, you got to finish something. Just writing a couple chapters is not going to get you to the point where you can have a complete book that is worthwhile to read and give to people. So that's what I told the kids. I'm like, you guys just tell stories. I do video game storytelling classes with kids and adults, and it's a totally different way of telling a story, especially if you're doing some dungeon type thing where you don't always control the direction that people are going. So it's a different way of thinking and telling a story, and you're not going to make any part of a video game if you don't do the whole thing. Nobody's going to even look at one level of a video game if it's only half complete, let alone the rest of it. So you just got to finish it, even if the other ideas are so good. Believe me, I know I've got so many of those right now.
Oh my God, shiny new ideas syndrome,
Yes.
right? Yes.
Yes.
No, but that is very true. I think that a lot of people, like you were saying before, get hung up on like making chapter one perfect, that they never finish the book because they're just
Yes.
stuck on chapter one. And a lot of times, like when you finish the book, that's when you figure out how to start it, right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I've got the end now. I know the perfect beginning. Whereas, like if you spend months just slogging through chapter one and never get to the end, like you're not gonna, you're gonna change it in the end anyway.
And if you got that experience under you and you
Right.
know you've written a story, you know the points you need to hit, it starts coming more natural and you get a lot less writer's block. You don't get to the
Yeah.
middle and go, well, I don't know what to do. Well, I know what to do because you have to do this to move the story.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so it
Yeah.
helps a lot. But if you're always, and my ending, I changed my ending like 4 times before I got
Right.
what I have now. And I think it was the best ending out of all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, if I hadn't gotten to that point, if I would have just rewrote the first half, I would have got to the end and went, I don't have time to do anymore. I'll just put it out. Well, then
Right.
the ending would have sucked. So
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And then you don't want to spend all that time on one chapter because you know you're going to give it to your editor or your beta readers and they're going to be like, what about this plot hole? You know,
Right. Yeah.
yes. Oh my gosh. I had book 2. My 2 main characters were going to the one character's village where his dad is still the magician, and they were asking how to get to the town magician's house. And it was that way for like a year because I wrote it and then I went back to book 1 to finish publishing it, came back to book 2, finished writing it, edit. So for a year, they're going around town asking where the hut is. And I went, wait a second. I mean, my son read it and neither of us caught it. And I said, wait a second. This is where he grew up. Wouldn't he know where his dad's house is?
Right.
Just stupid little hole.
Right.
yes.
Those plot holes they're persistent, right?
It's so easy to miss them.
Yes. Like typos, they survive somehow,
Yes.
They survive a lot of drafts. Yes. What do you think you have learned from the writing process?
Well, writing, the storytelling. The thing I've learned the most is the structure, the framework.
Yeah.
If you've not heard of Save the Cat or you've not heard of Hero's Journey, after you finish writing your book, go check those out. If you're just starting, don't go read Save the Cat and try and figure out a plot that fits in with this because you'll probably drive yourself crazy. It's not difficult, but it made so much more sense after I'd written some things. I read it and I went, oh, okay, I'm not sure what's going on here. But once I got some things written, I read Save the Cat and I went, oh, okay, I get this now. It makes more sense. Of course, just so you know, between Hero's Journey and Save the Cat, it's very difficult to watch a movie now and not know what's going to happen. Those movies are so easy to figure out nowadays and it sucks because you have really to take your brain off.
I know. I know. That's how I know I love a story is when I stop analyzing it.
Yes.
I've been analyzing stories my whole I was born to be an English major, right? I never never doubted I was going to be an English major in college because I always analyze stories and stuff like that, like movies. And I feel like a lot of story structure is intuitive because we consume a lot of things that are written in 3-act structure, movies and so on. But yes, once you have a story idea, and then reading about the structure and being like, oh, this happened too soon in my story or too late in my story. And then it kind of makes more sense.
If you want really good practice, get Tubi and find really bad movies because really bad movies are so much fun to analyze and figure out what they didn't do correct and why it screwed up the story. And it helps.
Right. Why does it feel off? Yeah.
Yes. So much better in learning Save the Cat that way.
Yeah, that's also a really interesting exercise to do in general. Because if we have to watch bad movies, right? If you're watching a bad movie, you might as well make something fun happen.
It'd be like Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Right.
Well, a good number of authors we've spoken to get their ideas from those things. They say, if I were writing it, I would do it this way.
Yes.
And from there, they develop a plot and it just takes it away. So their finished work in no way resembles the story that it originated from, but they
Right.
still take bits of information from it and rework it in a different way.
Yes.
Right.
I
Right.
just saw going around some of the groups, writers groups, like, oh my God, did you guys ever notice this? That Harry Potter is just a ripoff of Star Wars. And you get all the new people like, well, of course it is. She sucks. And why are they doing this? And all the people who've been around for a while are rolling their eyes going, oh my God, not this again. Yes, they're
Right.
similar. We know that because they're based on Hero's Journey. You want the other
Right.
22
Right.
examples that have come out in the last 5 years? I'll give them to you.
Yes.
Geez.
Right. There's no such thing as an original story. It's just how do you tell
Well,
it?
but
Right.
again, they are all based off the same like rubric. Is that the right thing?
Yeah.
Like
Yes,
the
same
same,
structure.
like yes,
Yeah.
the same structure.
Yes. And what
Um,
you said earlier, that's where characters really make the difference.
Yes.
mhm.
Yes. Absolutely. When we find new characters telling the same story, it makes it new. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how do you make time for writing? You have a lot on your plate, it sounds like, with teaching engagements and like going to talk to students and stuff. So, how do you make time for writing?
It can be hard, but my kids are grown now, so I'm not running them around to all the different activities in school and all that. So you kind of get that thing where you're like, well, I didn't realize that I used to spend 3 or 4 hours a day
In
with
the car.
kids and running kids around. And, if I don't have to worry about making a very healthy dinner for my kid, I can make a sandwich and I got like another extra hour to write. So,
Right. Right.
and I like writing because it is like playing with Lego or a Dungeons and Dragons, except I'm doing it myself instead of with others. I'm creating worlds. I'm writing the stories. I enjoy it. Other people get done with the day and they're like, oh, I'm so tired. I'm just going to sit and watch reality TV, which if you're a writer and all you want to do is watch reality TV, you might want to reevaluate the writer aspect because
Right.
reality TV is not going to help you in any way. But I'm like, I'd much rather go write because it's much more relaxing. It's much more fun for me to do that. So the hobby is, as much enjoyment as anything else.
Right. I think that's important to keep a hold of the joy that
Yeah.
that originally drew us to writing, as that joy of the writing process and being creative and telling stories.
What I really want to know is how do you homeschool kids and then still feel like writing? Because
Oh
that's
yes.
probably
I'm
stressful.
glad you asked because I was sort of wondering if I should say something. So writing is what I do for me to keep a hold of who I am and not just lose myself to the role of mother.
Yes.
And it's just as you said, at the end of the day, the writing is like what you do for fun. People think of it as work. For me, it's a chance to find my escape and explore this world I've created, and that's where I find my greatest joy is in writing.
Yeah,
So
it can be very relaxing. It's if you don't get the things out of your head, sometimes it drives you crazy. Everything else is a distraction then, and it's so hard to get through life.
Right.
yes. So often I'm like, can real life just calm down for a minute so I can sit down and write this down?
Right. Yes.
You daydream, what would I do with a week to myself? I'd pound out a book every day, just,
Right. Right. Oh my gosh. Right.
But alas, my kids are still small, so I've got a long while left.
Yeah, well, enjoy it. You definitely enjoy it because you look back. Mine are like hitting mid-20s now, and I'm like, I'm getting those pop-ups from my Google Photos saying, "Remember this 14 years ago?" I'm like, that was 14 years ago. When ago? What have I done since then?
Right. Right. Oh my gosh. I know. That is so true though. Like, kids are always so involved in activities and you don't realize the hours that are spent because I don't have kids, but I'll run an errand and be like, oh, it'll take me 20 minutes. Well, no, in reality it takes you 3 hours and then you're just where did the day go? I ran an errand and my day's over now. Yeah.
Right. I will say I'm proud of my son. He's toyed around with things, but right now he's got some friends and they're actually creating their own comic book. He's writing the story and they're doing the art and getting together. So I feel very happy that I've been able to instill that down to them, the
Yes.
creativity and the joy of writing, and that not just
Yeah.
watching TV or whatever all the time. So
Right.
quite
That
proud
is
of that fact,
amazing.
actually.
Well,
Yes.
we haven't had a comic book author on our show yet.
Right.
So yeah, give him our contact
Okay.
information, and we'll feature him right
Yeah.
before his publishing day.
Okay. That
Yeah.
sounds good.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Nice.
Yes.
All right. I've lost track of where we are in the questions.
Right, right.
No,
Do you have a favorite part of writing?
favorite part?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, the new ideas are always exciting,
Yeah.
Oh, I've got a great new idea. And like I said, my Scrivener folder has so many great new ideas. And then sometimes I go back and I read the idea and I'm like, yeah, why did I think that was a good idea?
Right.
But the couple worlds and series that I'm focusing on right now, I think are the most exciting for me. And the ideas were great, but I've had the idea. Now I need the stories in that world, and it's just as much fun. Like I said, it feels like I'm creating a D&D campaign for people to read, and trying to come up with something that I enjoy writing, because then I know somebody's going to enjoy reading it instead of just, well, I got to get something written, So that's just, it's fun. It's like a playing with toys is what it is.
Yeah. Only it's people in a fictional world. I love it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, and I completely relate to that. My main character in my trilogy started out on a character sheet, but like he just kept growing and had so much more story than could ever be told during the campaign. So yeah, he really took off.
You used to have little kids. So when you say, oh, I spent last night on the floor playing with figures or Legos, nobody looks at you weird. If I get asked, hey, what'd you do last night? Well, I got on the floor and played with my Star Wars figures and built some Lego. People are like, you did what? So I can write, and it's kind of the same thing. So I don't get weird looks.
Right. Don't let people judge you for how you find joy. No one's got time.
No. There's something to be said for like childish wonder, right? Like we, as adults, we lose that wonder, and just like seeing the world with the eyes of a child is like magical, right? Yes. So we should hold on to that.
Yes.
Like, hold on to it with tight fingers.
My kids say,
I collect action figures, whatever. Find joy.
Nice. Good. Yeah, my kids say I'm like a big kid. When we saw The Force Awakens for the first time in the theater, they said I was like a little kid on the edge of my seat, dangling my legs, so excited, bouncing. Yeah, they're like, you're a bigger kid than we are.
Right, but I mean, like, how much joy and happiness does that bring you to have that excitement and that joy of just the movie experience and getting to see how the story unfolds? Like, I think that we should put away childish thinking, but not childishness, right?
I agree.
There's so much value in just being childish sometimes.
Yeah.
And I feel like as adults, we like try to strip all that away from ourselves, but like there's so much great. Like your life is much more enjoyable because of art, because of play, because of all those things.
Isn't there a famous quote, something along the lines of, I'm old enough to read fairy tales again?
Yeah.
Is that Tolkien?
That's so true. Right.
Either that or Lewis. So
right.
That's pretty awesome.
So funny. They were in a writing group together. You know what I mean? And like Tolkien was like, you can't mix metaphors, and he hates Lewis's writing. Yeah.
I was in a mastermind group where the leader sent everybody in the group a book called The Inklings. And it was written by a lady from Kent State Press. She published it through Kent State Press right here. So I actually talked to her, and all the research she did into the Inklings with Tolkien and Lewis and all that. And it's a great book. I mean, it'd be a good one to check out if you're really into that, what that group did and everything.
Right. Yeah, no, I will definitely check that out.
So you've told us your favorite part of writing. What is your least favorite part of writing?
That's even tougher, because trying to find the time sometimes, because there's so many things I need to do at times, or am doing, And like my one author buddy says, like, well, isn't writing one of those important things? Yeah, it is. And I get sidetracked sometimes with, oh, you know what? I really need to clean this cabinet out because
Right.
it just bothers me if I don't. I know it needs done, so I've been doing pretty good. And the problem is once I start writing, it's like, oh, look, 3 hours went by. So it's
Right.
not like
Right.
it's just getting to sit down sometimes. And I'm doing other things, like I said, with video game storytelling and some other things like choose your own adventure books or video series I'm making,
Mm-hmm.
so I'll go and work on those things. And I'm like, oh, I didn't get any writing in today. So it's connected to writing, but not always the
Right.
writing. And I've got, like I said, book 2 coming out. I've got another series I'm getting started on. Book 3 is partly planned. So it's not like
Right.
I'm not making progress. I probably could make a little better progress.
Right. It's always trying to work harder, work smarter, not harder.
Right.
Right. So the writing adjacent stuff can be difficult because it still needs to get done. But then we're like, but I didn't write today, and so we kind of beat ourselves up over
Right.
over that stuff. Yeah.
Mhm.
But it sounds like you're pretty productive overall.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I hope
yeah.
so.
Yeah, yeah. So we've talked a little bit about what influences your writing, but I really want to ask you, like, writer's block. How do you deal with it?
Well, I think we were mentioning the wolf picture.
Mm-hmm.
That's my wolf hunter. I use him as my muse, and he doesn't really do anything for me other than I think of a muse as guiding you and
Right.
inspiring you. So in a way, I've trained myself, I guess you could say, that when I'm thinking of Hunter or looking at pictures of Hunter, it puts me in that mood of writing that
Mm-hmm.
I should be writing. So, it's like if you're a race car driver and you get behind the wheel, you're driving, you're not
Right.
thinking of
Right.
other things. When I'm with Hunter, I'll go out and I'll go pet him for a little bit or whatever. I've got his picture. It's like, okay, now you clicked over in the writing mode and you need to write. And sometimes for me, that's, not good to jump around, not good to not finish things. But if I'm really just not feeling it for the day on Town Magician and I'm stuck, I've got my Oddish Questers and I jump on that and I'm really excited about that. And the thing is, then that'll give me the break from Town Magician. So I'll make more progress on it the next time I do write instead of going weeks without writing anything. I've got 2 things I juggle between. And for me, that works.
I think that works for a lot of people too, because that works for me as well. Like if I get stuck with one project, then it's like, oh, but I have this other thing I could work on as well, and it kind of gives you that break you need, but you still feel like you're doing, you're moving forward. So that can
instead
be
of
really
just re-editing chapter 1 again.
Right, as long as we're not stuck on chapter 1, right? Right. No, that's perfect. I was just gonna say, like we were kind of talking about it earlier, but like writing those secondary character stories can be another great way for breaking writer's block. I did that with my first book where I was like, oh, I'm gonna write this character point of view that'll never make it into the story, but her perspective was so interesting. I ended up putting her as a character that tells her story in books 2 and 3. So I was just like, that was a perfect way to break writer's block for me.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
All right. What would you say has been your most significant writing victory so far?
Pulling out 35,000 words from a 70,000 word story on my first book. Because that was when I got the edit back from the editor, like a lot of new authors, I'm looking like, okay, great. They were so excited about it. It changed their life. No, it didn't.
Right.
She read it, marked it up, sent it on, and read another thing. Forgot all about it. But that was kind of the cold water reality check. It's like, yeah, you got to work on this. Yeah, you need some help. But I didn't get discouraged. I didn't look at it as, oh my God, you suck. Why are you ever doing this? Because I don't get as much read on my stuff now. So I've learned, I've gotten better. And I just kept going. So I use all that negative feedback, and editing shouldn't be negative feedback. I used to hate getting to the point, and I think a lot of authors are afraid of sending their stuff in to get edited because they're going to hear all the bad stuff and it makes them afraid and nervous. But I actually look forward to it because I found that once I get it written, give it to my editor and get back all that bad stuff, that I kind of feel, again, that's another, I feel freer now. Now I can go change a little bit of this or whatever, because the worst part is done. And sometimes some of my best writing comes after it gets edited and they tell me, yeah, what the heck is this? Why'd you do that? So that's that's something I've learned to enjoy more than I used to.
Right. I think it's a mindset that we need to have, that, like, of course we're not perfect, especially if we're new at things. Like, we have this expectation that we have to be perfect the first time we try something. Like, of course we're not going to be perfect or the best or, you know, excellent at, you know, things that we're kind of new at. But that mindset of being like, but this is going to make me better. This is going to improve my story, and it's valuable to do that. Like, that's so important to have, especially as new writers. I feel like that, not getting, like, it's okay to have feelings about it, right? Like, I'm an editor and I let people know, like, just sit with it, you know, look it over, get mad, say like, oh, she just doesn't get it, you know, like, that's fine. Like, have your feelings, sit with it. And then after you have that space and that time to think about it, you might be like, oh, I can see why she maybe made this suggestion, because like, you know, you're more open to it after you get over your
absolutely
feelings.
Oh,
and, and it's totally valid to have those feelings. It's totally normal to have those feelings. But like, yeah, just like having that mindset of like, this is just going to make my story, which is good, even better. Like, that's so helpful.
Yep.
Yes. They're not there to punish you. They're there to coach you into a better version, into your book, a better version of itself. Yeah.
Yes. And it's very important to find an editor that you get along with and you feel comfortable with and that understands you and the story. I worked with a book coach editor for a while, and I think part of it was me. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know why I'd want a book coach or editor. You know, I didn't know any of that. So some of the feedback may have been good and I just wasn't taking it, but she didn't really get what I was trying to do. I don't think she understood middle grade fantasy, because there were a couple things she told me to take out and I'm like, but it's a kid's book, you know? And she's like, well, no, this just doesn't. I'm like, no, that's funny for kids, you know? So that's when I like realized, yeah, we're not clicking here. This isn't working. So don't be afraid to move on, find somebody else, but don't do it just because they said, yeah, you need to work on this and fix this. That's not a reason to get rid of them.
No, I always say get a free sample edit, because like seeing how they comment and how, like, will show you like, oh, I don't take their feedback well, or I take their feedback well. Like you get a lot out of seeing like exactly what they do with your writing, and then like being able to be like, this is helpful.
They understand your vision is very important.
And if I had an editor and I got back my book and there was like one or two things changed per chapter and like hardly anything commented or read, I'd get rid of them also. I wouldn't go, oh, I'm so good. Look at me. That's an editor that's not doing their job.
Right. That's an easy paycheck where they didn't put in a lot of work. So, what are you reading right now?
Oh, what am I reading? So I mentioned The Talisman. I've been rereading that. I just got done Louis L'Amour. I still go to my local comic book store. I've known this man for 33 years. He still saves my favorites for me when I go visit. But he bought this huge collection, and he had a whole bunch of the old 50s, 60s Dell flip books. They're from a publishing company called Dell. They're short novels, like 120 pages each, and you read one and then you flip the book over and you read another one. It was the gimmick. And they're old sci-fi. I've been reading some of those. I've pulled out Tarzan, Lord of the Rings, and reread that. I haven't read that for about 25 years. And I mean, you want to talk about a book that would not make it in today's world? That's a book. A lot of problems with that book, but the pulp fictionness of it, I enjoy. I just got done reading Doc Savage. I picked up Riordan's Lost Hero series, started that partly because I was watching Percy Jackson on Disney, and I thought that was pretty good. They fixed the arch scene, so that was cool. So instead of going back and reading that series again, I figured I'd read the the Next Generation series because I haven't read it yet. So I got
Are
several
are
things I
you
jump around
liking
with.
it?
Very good.
I love the Percy Jackson series, but then I tried to read the next one in the other one, but I was like, these are the Roman gods, and I was just like, we're not vibing. I
It
was not
ties
vibing with the Roman
in.
gods.
It
Yeah,
does tie in. They don't. They come
right.
back.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Because I was
They-
just like,
Have some
I had a
patience.
hard time getting into that book because I was like, but I love the Greek
But your
gods. Like they're so,
characters,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
well, I'm reading a Lost Hero, and at the moment Percy's missing. They don't know where he's at.
Yes,
But
yes.
the first half of the book, I'm like, oh my God, this is just a retelling of the first Percy Jackson book.
Right,
Give me something new, Rick. But more than likely, him and his editor and publisher said, look,
right.
you sold a gazillion of these books. Let's do that again. That's just what it felt like.
Well, right. Or
He
for
is
people
very
who haven't
formulaic.
read
Yeah.
read the book might need a little clue of what's happening, right?
Yeah.
All right. Is there any writing advice that you've been given that you just absolutely did not like? It did not resonate with you?
Yes, not me particularly. It was one of the writing groups I went to. And this is when just a while back, I was starting to feel more confident in my own skills and knowledge. And there was a newer writer, Nervous, and he had a horror story. And he was reading this horror story. And it's going on. And I'm like, wow, this is not bad. This is pretty good. I read horror. I've read horror my whole life.
Right.
Well, there's two people in this group. They're both action writers. They write action and mystery type books. And they always rip everybody apart and tell everybody the same advice that, oh, you need to cut this out at the beginning. Just get right to the dead body on page 1 and do this. Well, this guy's story was all on the basis that the main character was a ghost, but you didn't know it was a ghost right away. And so it was a build up to that. And they ripped it apart, said, all this should be thrown away. Just start with that. And I'm like, you guys know nothing about horror. Have you even read a horror story?
Yes.
I know you've never written one. I'm like, this is wrong. Leave exactly what you have because it built up perfectly for horror.
Right.
Not every genre needs to be treated like it's thriller with the body on page 1. There are some with a build up. I mean, the girl with the dragon tattoo did not like the page 1 start with everything going on. It took me a while to get into that book, but it built up well, so yeah, the advice I've told people, and this got me in trouble with another author. We were at a round table and she was trying to sell some how to write books for writers that she wrote. And I basically said to all your writers out there, stop buying all the books and the courses, just go write. And she gave me a dirty look. I said, the only advice you should ever do 100% is take every bit of advice with a grain of salt and evaluate it. Don't follow any advice just verbatim and do it because it doesn't always work for you. I was at a conference that a lady was talking about. She does serial fiction. And she starts on January 1st and goes until July 1st. And every day she's posting a new chapter of this serial fiction story. And she has people paying her for this to go to get access to read it early because then she'll release the book in December. But they don't want to wait. They want it right now and they pay her. And that is how she makes a living doing that. She doesn't publish the book until later and that doesn't make as much money. People pay to read the serial fiction every single day. But she's a romance writer and these people like her writing and that's what they want. At the conference, like every single person's like, well, I'm going to do serial fiction. I'm going to do I'm like, you write military sci-fi. Those guys are not going to pay you to read this every single day. Forget it. So I had to evaluate what she did to turn into what works for me. And that's, what I told other people. I'm like, does it work for you? Don't just do it verbatim. So evaluate any advice because not everything may work for you.
Well put.
Right.
Yes.
That is great. I love that answer. Yes. And it's very true that different genres have different expectations or different tropes or different ways of doing things. So you can't apply everything with a broad brush stroke and be like, well, this is how I write. So everyone must have to write like this. Like the whole idea that you want to start your novel with the reveal of he's a ghost. It's just but what?
What's the point now? Yeah.
Right. That reveal only works because you spend the whole beginning of the book thinking he's just a regular
you
person.
got totally invested in the story, and then you're like,
Right.
oh my God, it's really a ghost. Well, now I got to keep reading. It was well done, I thought.
Yeah.
But he was new and he was afraid, and they're telling him, take this out, and they're like so forceful about it. And he's like, well, okay, I guess I will. No, that device doesn't work for you.
Right.
Yes.
And that's true. There's so many different ways of writing. That's why we do the shows. We love talking about different ways of writing because there's as many ways to write as there are writers who write, so love getting that
Absolutely.
perspective. But we do want to give you a chance to let our everyone listening along at home know where they can find out more about you and your book. So go ahead and share your website and your socials.
Yes. Okay. So my website is sa-Schneider, and Schneider is Schneider, right there in the corner there. It's sa-Schneider.com. And I've got my books on there. I've got the short stories. I've got quite a few short stories for Town Magician. Again, all of them have discussion questions and words to know for teachers and parents, encouragement for writing. I've got a couple other books on there that I've done recently. Everything from some free stories, a $5 book. Town Magician is $10 in print. So check it all out there. And I keep adding resources for teachers. I'm doing some video series. Like I said, I'm working on one for Choose Your Own Adventures and how to create them and make them. I've got other videos on there from, making bookmarks with old books imaginations, inspiration instead of a writing prompt. Here's a bunch of pictures. What story does that inspire you to write? So various things like that for parents and all that. And on Facebook, I'm S.A. Schneider Auth, A-U-T-H. You can find me. And I usually try and everything I post on my website, I usually try and put up on Facebook if that's where you're at. I do have an Instagram. I don't remember what it S.A. Schneider something. I'm not on there as much. It's mostly my website and my newsletter and Facebook.
Yes, and the website sounds like a fabulous resource. So there's a lot of great stuff on there. Thank you so much for joining us. This was like such a fun and wonderful conversation.
Thank you, ladies.
So, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to make it for the show. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys. It was great.
Yes, and thank you to everyone who's listening along at home. And remember, there's more than one way up a mountain, and our next episode airs Friday. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, you can find us on social media at The Telnut Show or email us at thetelnutshow@gmail.com.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach, and can be found at hijinksrudder.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to four, and you can find her at kirshafox.com. Thanks and see you next time.